Hello and welcome to Talking Events. Before we start today's episode, let's give out the thanks. Headbox.com have very kindly sourced and helped us obtain today's venue, which is the Shangri-La Hotel at the Shard, London. If you are listening to this, I urge you to hop onto YouTube, hop onto eventindustrynews.co.uk and look at the video, because we're on the 35th floor of the Shard, overlooking London, and I think by far and away this is the best location that we've had for the podcast since we started doing them. So big thanks to headbox.com for sorting that, and to Claire Metcalf and her events and hospitality team at the Shangri-La Hotel at the Shard, London, for looking after us today. So on with today's episode, and very much in keeping with the theme of hospitality, we welcome for the first time to the podcast Nathan Evans, Operations Director for Smith Wollensky London. Nathan, thanks for joining the podcast.
Absolute pleasure.
Great to have you here. And this is a little bit of a departure for the podcast, because we've not really had a guest on with your background and specifically working in the nature of venue that you operate and run in London. Mm-hmm. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what Smith Wollensky is for the people that aren't aware of the brand, a little bit about its history and where you are in London and what you do?
Well, Smith Wollensky is really the quintessential New York steakhouse. It'll be 40 years old next year, and it started in New York City on 3rd Avenue and 49th Street by Alan Stillman. And they have 10 restaurants in America, and this is the very first one outside of the US. And we opened in the Grade 2 listed Adelphi Building, just off the Strand, on the 17th of June last year. So just coming up to our first anniversary.
So not even a year old.
Not even a year old, still a baby.
But very much established very, very quickly on the London restaurant scene and the London event scene.
Absolutely. It's a large premises. It's 15,000 square feet, so there's 320 seats, 3 private dining rooms. It's all been designed by Martin Brzezinski, the go-to guy for restaurants, who designed Sexy Fish and Balthazar and the Ivy and so on. So it's got a touch of glamour about it, but it's a little bit of New York in London. And
we should point out that this is high-end dining, isn't it? In terms of its decor, in terms of the hospitality, and that's very much the reason why we've invited you to be a guest on today's episode, is talking about that high-end level of hospitality. The event professionals that listen to the podcast, who may have experience of catering for event delegates, for event guests, whether that be an award ceremony, a conference, a seminar, a trade show, whatever that may be. People have experience of catering en masse for people. Yeah. But when it really comes to the high level of hospitality that you guys do, that's perhaps something that we've still got a lot to learn about, isn't it?
Well, I think that's one of the benefits of using a restaurant space where you have an existing team that do it day in, day out. Mm-hmm. And for us, it's all about the quality of the ingredients. Obviously, the beef is of the highest order, comes over from the Midwest, 8,000 kilometres, and then we dry age it on the premises, butcher it on the premises, and so that's really one of the centres of excellence. Huge wine list, but what you get in America, which is sadly lacking still in the UK, is this sort of warm, welcoming hospitality. They wrote the book on the guest experience, I think, and that's what you get.
And it's an old cliche, but cliches are cliches for a reason, aren't they? Because, as you point out, the Americans have this reputation historically for doing hospitality really, really well. Yeah. And that's something you've been able to bring over to London, which I guess was evident in certain elements of other places in London. But
absolutely.
This is just to go back on the history of the brand of Smith Wollensky as a steakhouse and as a steak restaurant in the US. Mm-hmm. We're talking about something that's got quite a serious brand in terms of reputation.
I mean, there are lots of great steak restaurants in New York City. Peter Luger's in Brooklyn and The Palm and Sparks. But in the late 80s, there was a poll done through the New York Times, and overwhelmingly, Smith Wollensky was voted the best place to go and get a steak. And it was really about the people that worked there. And now you have 5 fathers and sons working in the same restaurant. But New York Times printed a simple line which said, "A steakhouse to end all arguments." And I think that sort of summed it up. And it was that wonderful combination of the best beef, great sides, amazing wine list, but this wonderful hospitality that was almost entertaining the guest rather than just delivering a service.
Because the best restaurants do that, don't they? They create an atmosphere and they create an environment within which the customers can enjoy the food that's then on offer. And this brings us back, I suppose, to looking at hospitality and what the events industry can learn about hospitality. And we're not just talking about hospitality when they're hosting a meal, are we?
No.
Hospitality extends to somebody walking into a conference venue and being welcomed with a cup of coffee in the morning.
Absolutely.
So we're talking really today about learning and how we can learn from an operation such as yourselves, how the welcome, how the environment, how the atmosphere, and what is then offered can all combine together to create that experience.
Absolutely. I think it's, there are lots of great places to eat, lots of great venues out there. And I think that at the end of the day, your customer service is singularly the most important thing upon which you're measured. And, we could talk for a long time about how you get to that point. And you're only as strong as the weakest link in a team. But you really have to focus on several things. You have to be totally committed to training people in the business, and the Americans love to standardize and they're very good on training programs. So our training program, which is sort of adapted from the US, is huge, and they get tested on every section of the business from wine to food. But more than that, that's not going to create someone that really enjoys their job. And I think as management, we need to create environments in which people want to come to work and have a good time when they're at work. Mm-hmm. Because if they have a good time and they're well remunerated, they will naturally look after people that walk through the door, and they're not mutually exclusive. You can't just train people and expect them to do the job. And so, we've been open for 11 months, and we're still with exactly the same team we started with. And that is very, very rare in the hospitality business, in restaurants in London, where there tends to be quite a throughput of people.
Absolutely,
generally.
Yeah.
And what that means is that we've managed to establish not only a business where people are constantly learning, so they never get bored, but also that they love coming to work and we have a lot of fun at work. And so, they have that ability to be smiling genuinely, not the painted-on version. Mm-hmm. And that makes a huge difference when someone walks through the door, whether it's 7 o'clock in the morning for a breakfast meeting or a conference, or whether they're coming for dinner after the theatre at 10 o'clock at night.
I think it was Richard Branson that said, give them the skills to move on, but treat them so they don't have to.
That's right, absolutely, yeah.
When we're talking about events and utilising and translating that hospitality that you offer over to the event side of things, mm-hmm. which is very much applicable for today, let's look at the restaurant as a space, as an entity, mm-hmm. Where it is, its location, and what it potentially offers event clients.
Okay, well, I think one of its strengths is its central location. It's literally about 50 yards from Charing Cross train station one way, and 50 yards from the Savoy Hotel on the other, just off the Strand. So it's very centrally located. The Adelphi Building, where it's housed, is a Grade 2 listed art-deco building right on the Thames. And if you get up to the sort of 13th floor, the views of the river are quite remarkable. And so it's smack bang in the middle of the West End. And in terms of the venue, it's 2 floors. It's a ground floor and a very, very large, light, airy basement, and 3 completely separate private dining rooms. And so it gives a huge amount of flexibility for the event professional. I think you could have anything from a very small breakfast meeting for a dozen people or less, up to the entire venue booked out for mm-hmm. for larger parties.
We have spoken on very recently on a previous episode of Talking Events about transforming venues into event spaces. Could we perhaps highlight some examples of what the sort of the demands when you have engaged with event clients and they're seeking to look at the venue? Have they come to you because they've already absolutely 100% nailed the fact that they want to use your restaurant, or is there an element of dipping their toe in the water and actually coming to you to sort of think, is this possible with a restaurant venue? Do you find sometimes that event clients are actually thinking, probably not because it's a restaurant?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that you will meet some people who are sceptical about whether or not you can turn a restaurant space into a great event space. And I was listening to one of your podcasts from Twickenham, was it? Or Wembley?
Yeah,
from Twickenham Stadium. And one of the gentlemen there was talking about trying to find a venue that at least you like sort of 85% of the way.
Yeah.
And then the last 15% can be, you can turn that venue into your own with your branding or whatever you need. But we've done a huge number of events of all different types since we've been open. We launched the Adelphi Building for Blackstone, who are the landlord. They own the whole building. They've invested 60 million in it. And it's all office space, and they wanted to launch the building to the property world. And so we had 320 agents from Knight Frank and Jones Lang LaSalle and so on, who viewed the office space and then came for a party. And it was all themed in the 1930s style, in keeping with the age of the building.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we completely transformed the venue, not only having music from the 1930s, the flappers, if you like, and the original vehicles parked outside, but also the basement was completely transformed from a restaurant into a large venue for stand-up drinks and canapé reception. And that was really, bringing in digital screens to celebrity DJs, dance floor, cocktails, enormous seafood station branded for the Adelphi Building. And so that's a very, very different experience to what people would expect when they would walk in on a normal Friday night.
How much consideration was given to the use of the restaurant as an event venue and as an adaptable event venue when it was actually being designed? Because as you pointed out, it's less than a year old, so it sounds like that this was planned in some way, shape or form.
Yes, I think that businesses of this scale, and there aren't many restaurants in London that are 15,000 square feet, you can count them on one hand. And so I was involved in the design process with Martin Brzezinski right from the outset, and in the back of your mind is always, how will I accommodate this event? How can I adapt the business for that client? And I think that flexibility is enormously important. An example would be that private dining rooms on the whole, if they aren't booked in restaurants, they lose you revenue.
It's dead space. It's not being used.
So all of our the two main private dining rooms that are annexed from the main restaurant have huge doors that fold completely back, so that those spaces can be an extension of the restaurant space or the event space, rather than being a complete empty, a separate entity, if you like. So you have that ability for it to be part of the main room or completely separated.
So in a sense modular, in that it can be expanded or contracted depending on whether or not it's being used as a private dining room or a full event space.
Absolutely.
And without getting too geeky about things, when you're dealing with event clients who may want to bring in, you mentioned screens, branding, other elements, band, live music, were considerations given to that? And did you engage with any consultants or partners who brought in expertise specifically on stuff like AV or whether or not you would have the right power requirements for live music or for screens and things like that?
Yeah, I've opened about 4 restaurants in my career in London, and every time you do one, you try not to make the same mistakes twice. You usually just end up making new ones, but I think one of the things that we did was to make sure that the AV, the internet connections were bulletproof. So we put 100 megabyte fibre optic broadband into each private dining room, which is, a cost, a significant cost, but that will allow you to stream, a video conference to Australia without worrying about your up and down speeds. We put additional power everywhere, rather than just the obligatory cleaning socket on the skirting board. And we made sure that the lighting was controllable in every single area, which means that you obviously create that mood that a lot of event professionals are after. By dropping out single light fittings. And so a lot of time and effort was put into making sure the space was as flexible as possible for all eventualities.
The nature of running any restaurant is a busy one, and you ask anybody who's worked in the restaurant industry at any level, it's long hours, it's long days and long nights.
It is.
Are you able to, or have you been able to actually go out there and look at either other restaurants or other event spaces and see what they're doing and see what you can learn from there? Or was this set up as or is part of the thinking that you're very much going to pioneer a new way of thinking about how hospitality is delivered?
I think both. I have a number of contacts in the event industry. There's a great business called Fisher that tends to, it has several royal appointments and carries out events in places like Clarence House and St James's Palace. And so I spoke at length with those people there before we built the restaurant, just to get an angle on the challenges that they face when they go into venues with lighting, with sound, with all these things, and that certainly puts your mind in the right frame, if you like. And then we also, you have to, when you build restaurants, you're very minded to the event business, but you also have to make it feel really good on a regular day of the week. And that means, the way the tables fit and space and the way people move around a room that creates energy. So people like to see the staff busy. Staff need good, clear lines of sight so they can see customers that, at any moment in the meal. And so those things are equally as important. And it's getting that balance between having a great restaurant environment that works every day and then being able to completely change the environment for the event business.
Events are, by and large, built on reputation, and will seek to re-engage and source repeat business from clients by giving them a quality experience. That will inevitably help the event grow profitably and in size and financially. And what's interesting, I'm just looking at a report that was published on Eat Out magazine.co.uk. And was published yesterday. Okay. And it identifies that improving how the UK hospitality and leisure sector manages and responds to customer feedback could potentially contribute an additional 3.2 billion to the UK economy, simply by, in essence, raising the standards of hospitality and responding to the critique of our customers. How would you look at that? And by and large, are we overly critical of our industry in the UK, hospitality and restaurant?
I think it's a great thing. I think that things like TripAdvisor, for instance, are a very positive force. I think there's a lot of negativity in our industry about review sites and so on. And I think that where else could you get completely free feedback? We used to spend a fortune on mystery guest reports to find out what was happening subversively in our restaurants to get that level of feedback, and now you're getting it for nothing. So I think they're hugely valuable resources. In terms of events, you build relationships with people and you learn from each and every event. We do a huge amount of business with PwC because their head office is geographically very close to the restaurant, and they use us for everything from breakfast meetings when they run out of meeting rooms in their own building, through to lunches and dinners in private dining room, to a Christmas party taking over the whole floor. You don't build those relationships unless you email the PA or whoever booked it the following morning saying, just want to make sure everything was great with the event last night. Could we have done anything better? I think you've got to be completely open and welcome feedback, because only through feedback are you ever going to improve and build long-term relationships with corporate clients and event businesses.
And the parallels again with the event industry, and we're talking about, we're perhaps being a bit too divisive between talking about the restaurant industry and hospitality with the restaurants and hospitality within events.
Yeah, I see them as one of the same.
They are very much crossing over now, as we've identified with the venues themselves being used for events. They are in essence one of the same. I know that a lot of event professionals out there will utilise tools that allow them en masse to respond or to speak to their audience, their delegates, their customers, their visitors, whatever they term them for the particular event. Do you think that there's, with things like MailChimp and mass emails and social media, that there is too much emphasis placed on mass communication, and that we also need to maintain the one-on-one communication and follow-ups regardless of the size of the event? I know it's difficult for big events to do that, but really there could be more one-to-one interaction.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, and when we host a lot of networking events in our business. British American Business held a huge event with us recently, and I think that one of the great things about those is it reminds you that the purpose of it is to get people talking to one another face to face. And I think that there could be a lot more of that. There should be a lot more follow-up on the telephone rather than by email. I think we're all so reliant on email, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram nowadays, and they're all very valuable tools, but it shouldn't be, exclusive to digital and email and so on.
But there is almost that warm feeling that you get when you have that personal interaction with somebody, when somebody bothers to phone you up and say, was everything okay? And you think, oh, I wasn't expecting that for a start.
Yeah.
And if it's something you weren't expecting, generally then you're a little bit taken by it, but inevitably then there's that warm feeling that you get of, well, that was very kind of them to actually bother to phone me directly rather than just blanket bomb me with an email.
You just before we came on air, you mentioned Richard Branson, and there was a wonderful thing when Virgin Atlantic first started, and they had I think they had 2 planes, and Richard would sit in his Maida Vale home and pick up the telephone, and one of their great things for upper class was that you would have a limousine pick you up at the airport.
Absolutely, yeah.
And in every limousine was a telephone, and he knew which passenger was in which car, and he'd have the passenger list, and he would ring the car, and the driver would say, there's a phone call for you, Mr. Evans, and he'd pick up, and Richard would be on the telephone, and he'd ring the customer and say, just wanted to find out how your flight was today. And I think that you'll floor someone when the senior person in the business calls you personally to make sure you've had an enjoyable experience. And so I try and speak to as many people as I can on the phone personally, for exactly the same reason. Because if the operations director is picking up the phone and speaking to the PA and said, I've come in this morning.
Absolutely.
And to get that personal connection.
Yeah. And I think, again, the industry can identify with that. I know one example of seeing the build for a trade show taking place at a venue in London, and one of the exhibitors being helped in through the loading bay, wheeling pallet trucks and carrying boxes by somebody who they just thought was one of the crew on site to help do that, because the guy was in combat trousers and boots and high-vis and had a walkie-talkie, and the next day saw the guy on the show floor in his suit and tie, and it turned out that was the director of the business.
Absolutely.
So he was there,
at the sharp end.
At the sharp end of it, and I think that's when we talk about hands-on, sometimes we don't necessarily have to be physically hands-on, but it's just that interaction of a certain level directly to the customers that shows that they care.
Definitely, absolutely.
It's a fascinating subject. We've actually just had a little look at some of the events that you've got coming up in the restaurant. I'm wondering whether or not they're on the website, so I wonder if you're at liberty to divulge some of the details about some of the events that are being hosted. There are lunches with football legends coming up. There are summer steak events. Talk about some of the things that you're working on at the moment from
one
an
of the
event
things
perspective.
that's proved incredibly popular, and we've got another one coming up very soon, is sabrage, which is the celebrated practice of opening a bottle of champagne with a sabre, which was something that French cavalry officers used to do: take a chilled bottle of champagne out of the saddlebag, and break the glass collar, taking the cork out, and before they went into battle. And we actually teach people how to do it. And I've just
heard the shiver of event health and safety consultants across the UK shivering at the thought of people wielding swords and sabres and wine and champagne
Well, I've been
bottles.
doing it for 20 years and we haven't had an accident yet, but it is very, very safe. If you think about a bottle of champagne has about 8 atmospheres of pressure, about the same as a double-decker bus tyre, and all champagne bottles are made in 2 pieces with a seam. And what you're doing is you're bringing the sabre up across the seam to the weakest point. And it wants to break at that point, so they separate very, very easily. And because there is lots of CO2 in a bottle of champagne, there's no danger of getting any glass in your drink. And the only thing you can do with a sabrage bottle of champagne, of course, is drink it. So there's a wonderful opportunity to open all these bottles, be shown how to do it, and then have a great party.
But more event professionals out there identifying the possible use of sabrage parties at their events.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great way of getting people to. Well, it's very memorable. The first time you sabrage, it's quite a good feeling, and then you get inaugurated into the Confrérie de Sabre d'Or, the sort of club of the Golden Sabre, and it's a bit like being knighted. And so it makes people feel great. And they can take their little cork away, so their own sabrage bottle in a little felt bag, and they get their certificate to say that they did it. And so these are ways of really involving people in the event. And we've got lots of ways of doing that. We run great cocktail demonstrations and then get delegates and customers behind the bar to mix the drinks themselves. Mm-hmm. We have butchery demonstrations where they get to see all of the beef cut with our master butcher and then select a particular piece of beef to eat later. And so they can really engage with the business and see every angle. It's a much more sort of all-encompassing experience as a result of it.
An immersive restaurant experience,
absolutely,
rather than just going in, dining, and leaving.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
When you engage with your event clients, how does that process work? Do you find that most of the events that you engage with come to you with a tentative inquiry about whether or not they could use the venue? Do you have any outgoing activity that takes place to actively push the restaurant as an event space or as an event venue?
Yeah, I think London is an exceptionally competitive market, and I think that anyone that thinks they're going to sit back and wait for the events business to knock on your door is hugely mistaken. We have engagement on multiple levels with multiple areas of interest to our business, from entertaining PAs at Goldman Sachs, where we took them all to Kinky Boots for the night, the show on the West End, and have cocktail reception and so on, to actually going to trade shows, to speaking to all the DMCs, inviting them into the business, showing them the venue, hosting a cocktail party for them. And it's ongoing, it never stops. And there's always another group of interest, groups that we can attract. Concierge, for instance, at hotels. And so I think you've just got to continue the engagement as much as possible.
Do you have dedicated staff that are responsible for dealing with the event side of things, or is it a collective effort amongst the management?
It is a collective effort. We do have key people in departments. I have a wonderful lady called Lillian Fantonati, who is our events manager.
Wonderful name.
It's a great name, isn't it? And she heads up our events team with a sort of remit to fill private dining rooms and to the mechanism of booking the entire restaurant. But we work so closely because I share an office with Lillian and Susanna Palmer, who's my marketing manager, and our head receptionist. So we constantly discuss the events coming up, and we have a collaborative way of approaching it. And particularly if it's something that needs a decision from me, then I'll be at that meeting with the customer and say, well, yes, that can happen, or that's an easy thing to fix, or yes, we can disconnect that bit of equipment and remove it. And you've got to be as flexible as possible, I think. It's I've never ceased to be amazed about what the events business wants to do in a restaurant premises like that. So nothing's off limits.
There's an awful lot, I think, that the events industry can learn from the restaurant industry. But I think as we've highlighted today, fundamentally they're both doing the same job. They're delivering an experience to the customer. They want to do that well. They want to do that in the best possible way. They want to continue that engagement with the customer after that first visit, whether that be a visit to the restaurant or a visit to the event. So I thank you for your input today and being able to draw on your own experiences and how that affects the event industry. As always, we put out a call to people listening to the podcast or watching the podcast to get in touch, to tell us about your own experiences of event hospitality. Is it good? Is it bad? How can we learn? How can we improve it? For the time being, we should thank Nathan Evans from Smith Wollensky, London, for joining us. Nathan, thanks for coming onto the podcast.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Having a chat with us. smithandwollensky.co.uk is the place to go if you want to find out a little bit more about the London operation and a little bit more about the history of what is a fascinating company. And event professionals out there, go and have a look at it. Go and see what you can learn from this particular operation. Today's podcast being recorded, as we mentioned at the top of the show, at the Shangri-La Hotel at the Shard, London, and we're in a private meeting room on level 34, actually. A correction to my earlier statement of 35. We're only one floor down, though. It's still a remarkable view. Headbox.com have been kind enough to sort out today's venue. tune into it on iTunes. Please do subscribe to the podcast. Visit eventindustrynews.co.uk to watch the video recording of today's podcast and see the view for yourself. But for now, my name's James Dixon. You've been listening to Talking Events.